Okay.
Yes. You talk to smack here.
What? She's had that mouse by his tail.
She's always.
He doesn't feel secure doing that.
Okay. All right. For our new people, we've been working our way through this book, Callings, Finding and Following an Authentic Life by Greg Levoy. In the first part of the book are all the ways in which we are called, and there's many of them. It may be through people that you meet. It could be through dreams, synchronicities. It may be a movie that you come across. It may be health issues. And all of these are ways in which your soul, your higher power, whatever you want to call it, is trying to get your attention, perhaps to move or nudge you in a different direction. These are what Ralph Waldo Emerson called the whispers of the soul. And then we learned of ways that we can, or one of the ways that we can invoke these calls. And that is through generally pilgrimages. And pilgrimages can be all sorts of different things. They can be actual journeys to sacred sites. They can be, Muslims going to the Hajj, and Christians going to Jerusalem or Medjugorje or one of the other, Fatima or Lourdes. Or you could even do your own sacred journey simply using a labyrinth. There are all sorts of different ways. So the next thing that he moves on to is what he calls memory's vital secrets. The writer Toni Morrison once described how the Mississippi River had been straightened out in places to make room for homes and livable acreage, and how occasionally the river will flood these places. Flood is the word they use, she said, but in fact it's not flooding, it's remembering. Remembering where it used to be. All water has a perfect memory and is forever trying to get back to where it was. Isn't that wonderful? People too have perfect memory for some things. And one of the purposes of reviewing our own histories, Morrison says, is to remind ourselves of where we were before we were straightened out and paved over. Personal recollection can help us remember what we already know, and the healing properties of memory and imagination, which of course are blood relations, can help us recapture our natural curves. History is a story, and the telling of deep stories is the doing of soul work. Our past is intricately woven into our calls, and we can learn much about those calls by casting the occasional glance backwards. The past tells us what has passed on to us and what we're attuned to because of it. It tells us what wounds might be waiting as calls, what business is unfinished. It tells us what footprints we follow, what legacies and dynasties we're driven to carry on, what damnations we're driven to transmute, even what wrongs we feel compelled to right, which is what the journalist Marvin Barrett was propelled by when he was a young man. He made a solemn vow. The catalyst for that promise was a tragedy that took place on an Iowa summer afternoon in 1928 when he was 8. His 3-year-old brother, whose hand he had been holding only a moment before, was suddenly struck down by a car on the avenue that they'd been warned repeatedly to avoid. And his lifeless body was, from that moment on, inescapably forever mine. It was that afternoon, he would write 50 years later, that drew me to religion, made it inevitable that as at 22 I would dedicate my life to God. Nothing short of that dedication could set that afternoon right. For many writers and artists, the theme that predominates in their work also dominates their memories. To some degree, this is true for all of us. The past shapes our visions, which in turn define what we'll see and what we'll seek. The past contains hints about the deeper than conscious goals towards which the movement of our lives is trying to take us. As Ira Polgroff says, that thread that is always alternated between being visible and invisible, between surfacing and diving. The past reminds us of our struggle with our destinies and can often inspire us to remember that the great thing existed and was therefore possible, and so may be possible again, as Nietzsche puts it. The past reminds us that we've not only risen to challenges before and taken on daunting calls, but also occasionally stepped into the ring with a prize fighter and not been utterly undone, even if we haven't prevailed. It shows us what wisdom we've wrested from experience and what powers we've earned for our troubles. For many of us, the past also contains the records of a diaspora, the scattering of our life's purposes and integrity, the strewing of our priorities, the way we've wandered out of earshot of whatever is calling to us. Recollection is a way we can, again, remember ourselves, gather what has been dispersed, and in the process, perhaps, throw off a few curses. This is all fabulous stuff, I know. In the recollecting the past, you needn't compile an exhaustive account of your life, although some explorers, such as Carl Jung, Carlos Castaneda, Nikos Katsantzakis, and Buddha, have gone over the details of their entire lives in the service of self-knowledge. In Jung's case, twice. You can narrow your sights and you will see a lot. You can focus on just developmental areas like childhood, adolescence, middle or old age. You can remember what took place in the arenas of schooling, spirituality, relationships, creativity, or work life. You can even write your own autobiography, as Dina Metzger suggests in Writing for Your Life, through the history of your relationship to trees. You can also enter into dialogue with the forces that formed you. You can talk with your father or mother, with the house you grew up in, with the biggest decision of your life, with the most powerful conviction, or with the ghost of whatever saint has hovered near you all your life. I once talked with Elijah, the spirit of freedom, for whom my family always reserved a chair and a glass of wine during Passover celebrations, but who, at least to my untrained eyes, never seemed to come. I asked him what it takes to be truly free. In The Mystery of My Story, Paula Farrell Sullivan recounts the experiences of a man who wrote a lengthy dialogue with his old algebra book, realizing in the process that what had deterred him from entering medical school was his fear of math. He also discovered that this option was still open to him. This call still called to him. So in his 40s, he quit his job and went to medical school, following what Robert Frost called the road not taken. By opening the inactive file, says Pogroff, we may discover the lost opportunities of our lives. Though some of them are dead, others are merely dormant. We might remember the times we held off fateful encounters with the truth, avoiding dealing with something we have never since been able to shake, or suffered a crisis whose message completely escaped us. We may see the times we followed the path of reason rather than intuition, the path of least resistance rather than the right way. We may remember unfinished business and decide that we can find meaning in finishing it, possibly even revelation. In the 19th century, Pogroff described in At a Journal Workshop, a group of archaeologists discovered an ancient Egyptian tomb in which lay a portion of a tree. Embedded in the wood was a seed, which they planted merely to see if anything would happen. They never expected that after 3,000 years the seed would grow, but it did. So this was very interesting to me because I think often we try and shut out the past. We try and move away from the past. And especially if we've had trials or adversity or, horrid things happen, we tend to think that it's better to close the door and not re-examine. But he is suggesting that embedded within the past are many secrets, maybe even calls that we've been getting over and over and over, cosmic 2x4s as we call them, that we've been ignoring. These are things, yes, Ruth Ann.
Well, I can attest to that. One of the things that I think many of us ask ourselves is why we're here, what
Absolutely.
lessons we're learning.
Oh, yes.
And mine came to me as I got old enough to count up all the tragedies in my life, so-called, and realized that my lesson was to deal with the fact that I'm not a victim. And all of those things that I looked at as being victimized, realizing that these people and events were there to help me realize that they all were part of my growth and that I should be grateful for them. Now that's quite a switch from feeling victimized
Absolutely.
to being grateful.
But to be honest with you, I think that is a very common theme in spiritual development.
Mm-hmm.
I think, and especially if you've had, many troubles and adversities in
Right.
your life,
Right.
that we tend to see ourselves as victims. And then there comes a point on the spiritual path when all of a sudden we realize this was not sent to make us victims, to hurt us, to push us down. This was actually sent for us to learn. There's got two going here. Karen.
Carolyn Mace does it very well. It's called Your Noble Friend.
Yeah.
This shows up and causes you what you would consider being victimized from it. But she does explain it very nicely that they are your noble friend.
Yes.
Because they help you see whatever it is your journey is.
Absolutely. Jan.
Mary and I had an exercise when we went to the grief program in at Floral Haven. No, it wasn't that kind of exercise. Straight now.
It touched me.
Move it. Don't be such a victim.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you. All right. So, carry on, Jan. Sorry.
We were asked to make a chart of our lives and to think of the high and low, the significant points in our lives.
That was a very significant.
And go, yeah, that would have been way up there on the no-no scale, but to make a chart with things that had happened in our lives that we remembered that were significant,
Right.
and then to go back and rate them as difficult or exhilarating.
Uh-huh.
You know, so like, you know, going to grade school the first day and being scared to death would have been down, and then
Right.
graduating from high school would have been up.
Yeah.
But, you know, I started out doing this very reluctantly because I didn't want to look at it. So my first one was just this long, you know, for my whole
Right.
life. And then I started thinking about it and thought, this is really interesting, you know, and I went back and it got bigger and bigger and bigger. And it's just showed me the parts of my life where I was in difficulty, and then when things got better and something wonderful happened.
Right.
How life just is this.
I absolutely, I think it shows you the balance that goes on in life. You know, there are lows, but there are always highs. And generally, if you look back, you will see that there is some kind of balance going on there. But also, I think for many, parts of the spiritual journey can be acknowledging that you came in with a script, your sacred contract. You know, I hate using that term because it sounds so rigid and fixed. But it's more like a script. You know roughly what is supposed to happen, but none of the players have any lines. Everybody's ad-libbing. And then you are responding to whatever they come up with as you move forward to get to where you're going to go. And once you see that you actually chose the players in your play, you chose the lessons that you wanted to learn, you chose where you wanted to go, it kind of changes where you're coming from. Shelley?
One of the remarks that was made in that excerpt was about writing your story.
Uh-huh.
And this past year I had the opportunity to do that. And I was really surprised that in looking back, which was part of the preparatory tool we used, the hero's journey,
Thank
we
you.
had to develop a timeline
Right.
of seminal events in your life. It was shocking to me that even though I could be cognizant or aware of certain events and the impact that they had on me in theory, until I saw it in writing and saw that timeline and saw the patterns,
Right.
which we do that as a coaching tool with people who have illness.
Yes.
But to do it yourself, I guess what I'm saying is one thing to do it from a left brain perspective. It's
Right.
another thing to experience it.
Yes.
Was really life-changing for me.
Well, I think this is one of the things we talked about. Remember, I gave you a handout about the hero's journey. That if you sit down and write your own, perhaps drawing from some experience in the past, using different elements of that, suddenly it can change the way that you view this. You know, as Glasser said, stolen by Wayne Dyer, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. And I think once you begin to write it down or begin to you know, put it into some kind of structure other than what is in your mind, then I think it changes. Yes, Mary?
It was interesting that Jan said that, the two of us did that, because there that we both were in the same situation, doing the same thing, and her what she remembered was very different from what I remember. The thing that struck me the most about doing it was that there was a definite timeline pattern for my life that went in like 7-year segments that I really had never noticed before, because when you're living it, you're in the middle of it and you don't know. But I saw for the first time these very particular patterns
Yes.
that were happening that I thought was really interesting.
Absolutely. I remember when somebody once said to me, look back every 5 years and you will be astonished where you are from where you came from. And it's really true. You know, you tend to think, because you're not stopping and looking back, you tend to think that things are not really changing that much. But when you really pause and stop and look back, it's like, wow, I've come such a long way from where I was. And then you think, okay, I've reached the place where I'm, I'm okay. And then 5 more years goes by, and you look back and go, oh wow.
I didn't know that.
I didn't know then that I'd be here right now. So it's a very interesting exercise. Yes, Akhilesh.
I was thinking that we have a sense of time in this life, but it's not real. It's something that we make up for separation, and then we're going to use this sense of time and all these events that happen in a moment and spin them into a narrative, looking at our past, and then we're going to try and learn lessons from this narrative about ourselves. If you think the whole world is sort of illusory and we are in a play, then it might be worth thinking about what are we learning. I mean, is this a lesson or are we just making something up? And if we are, just something to think about.
Absolutely.
And then also thinking of ourselves as heroes, which is nice. But again, the whole thing of an ego versus. So, if it is this, I mean, this sense of narrative that we're building about ourselves, is this separating us from everyone, or is it? Because if our goal is to be one with everything, then do we need these heroes' narratives? And what role do they play? I mean.
But the whole thing about that is...
I mean, so in a sense, is there really this narrative? Does it really exist outside of this play?
I think it's one of the things, one of the tools that... Thank you, Akhilesh. One of the tools to help us make sense of this reality. It's in the same way with Noreen's question about, God, calling God God. We tend to attach labels or circumstances to things in order to try and make sense of them. Now, if you think about it with Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey, the whole thing about that is that what we tend to do, we tend to conceptualize it as, if I am the hero, then everybody else is not a hero. But the fact is, everybody is going through their hero's journey. And so, yes, there is a certain amount of separation in that instance when you decide if I'm the hero in my journey, then you all can't be heroes. But then if you turn it around and Stephen is sitting there thinking, if I'm the hero in my journey, then
What are you? So are you?
Yes. Go ahead, Jen.
Sometimes you see the heroes that helped you through that journey, that you couldn't have made it through that journey without those
Exactly.
heroes.
Yes. Mary.
That's just what I was going to say too, because we're all playing a part in the script, and the play is not. I mean, of course, it's made up, but we've all made it up, and we made it up together, and so because we each have these lessons to learn in the script, and we each get to be each one of them little different players and actors as we move along through
Absolutely.
the lives. We may choose to play, oh boy, that part was like, bleh. So we're going to try another one. I think it's part of this beautiful continuum that we're all in the process, and that we're all actually, even though we may feel separate, we're actually all holding hands and doing it at the same time.
Yes. Yes.
I was just going to say that speaks to the fact that we are all one, that we
Yes.
do this together.
And as usual, William Shakespeare, of course, hit it right on the head when he said, all the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. They have their entrances and their exits, and each man in his time plays many parts. That's the point. You don't come on as just one person doing one thing in one play.
Just think how boring it would be to be the hero.
Thank you, Billy. Yes, Karen.
Well, aren't we, do you feel like perhaps since we're all one, that we are all of the parts? I'm not making any sense.
No, you are. And you're bringing up a good point here, because
Paradox.
she's saying that if we are all one, then aren't we all the
All the
different
parts.
parts?
Yes.
Well, of course we are. But that is the whole thing. We have chosen, in order to make sense of it, just as we have time, we have chosen this body, this particular role to play this time, okay? And you have to realize that, you know, for some things you may be the protagonist in yours, but also you may be the antagonist in somebody else's. But that is what gives it balance. Because without the hero and the villain, there isn't that contrast that Abraham talks about in order to help you move forward. So, Akhilesh, yes.
So the other thought that occurred to me was we talk about living in the moment. But then I guess now we are also talking about reflecting from the past, quote unquote past,
It's
and
all the
learning
same
from that.
moment.
So
Yeah.
But it's
all the
but
same.
if
I
you
know.
believe
I mean, I
that
think we should balance both. I'm not saying one is better than the other. I'm just
No.
saying we have these different.
exactly,
things to
but
talk
as you pointed out, we have chosen to take time in order to make sense of this reality. How else do you make sense of it? You have to live in the moment. Yes.
So I just want to add again. I always bring this up, I guess, but the goal in some paths is to get freedom from this reality, right? And to
Right.
So, yeah.
But also, yeah, go ahead.
But as Michael Newton points out, we choose to come here
Yes.
for this playground, as some would call it, to that our souls expand more in coming in is a privilege. We get to expand our soul and our knowledge in process of doing the action of living rather than just hanging out in between lives.
Right.
It's a privilege and an opportunity to have the experience. We're just being co-creators like God by experiencing life. It's where we get to create. On the other side, we just get to plan, is the theory.
Mhm. Yes, Risa.
But to me, it's like the hero's journey is discovering that all the hero is ego. Like just ultimately, it's a thought, you know,
That's
you're
interesting.
trying to outgrow it, you know.
Interesting.
The path is
I'll have to
zero.
think about that one.
Yeah.
I'm just happy someone else said ego and not me.
Jelly.
I was just thinking about Akhlesh's, comment about, the duality of looking back and being fully present. And that's the thing I think is so important about this.
We can't hear
We
Shelley.
can't hear you, Shelley.
Yeah, hang on.
Santa Claus like today.
They've gone. They've gone. All right, try again.
No, I was just saying that for me, I think one of the best things, most important things about this book is it's giving us the tools to be fully present that we miss, meaning that a lot of times in our dialogue we use verbiage that we assume means the same thing
Right.
to people. We talk about surrender, we talk about being fully present, and all these terms that
Right.
that are very relative. But that's the tool. By looking back, it gives you
Yes.
the ability to be fully present. Another way.
And I think the other thing about that is he is saying glance backwards.
Right, not living. Don't
No,
study
no.
there.
Lao Tzu in the Tao tells us, if you are depressed, you are living in the past. If you are anxious, you are living in the future. If you are at peace, you are living in the now. Yes.
So I think the trick is to have to feel the joy in life and everything around you, but at the same time not being attached to it. I think that's
There we
the-
go. Yes. That's it. But the other thing too is, this is an illusion, and we're all trying to get rid of ego, and we're all going through. But if you really believe that we came here to learn something, then you can't discount those things. You have to acknowledge them. You have to see them in the perspective, as Shelley says, as learning tools. We came here for a reason. We came here with a purpose, our soul's purpose. This is saying that our soul is trying to nudge us and push us and direct us so that we can move forward on that journey. Yes,
I
Mary.
was just thinking of a really weird little abstract example that I can slide.
Abstract from an artist? Go.
Well, you know, and I was thinking of it in terms of an artist's tools. I mean, you know, you have this illusory thing going through you, whether it's your writing or your painting or you're playing an instrument, and you need that tool to be able to express it.
Right.
And so the tool gives you and what you're doing structure
Right.
to be able to put it out there. Otherwise, I mean, you know, you can float around there with it in your head or in your heart or wherever it's floating around.
Right, but unless
until
you
pick
express
up
it.
the tool
Yes.
that Shelley was talking about that gives you structure, then you are still floating around.
Exactly. And can
I think that's I think the painting example is a great one, because you can think of a life as a painting where, so if you're an artist and you're creating a painting, you take joy in the creation, but at the same time you don't let your ego be attached to that painting.
No, you can't.
No.
I mean, you shouldn't. So in a sense,
You shouldn't, but
you
that
have joy in
is
the
the
painting,
point.
but you're still detached from it.
Well,
you
I
let
see,
it go when it's done.
to
Maybe
me-
your life should be a painting like that. So.
To me, though, if the ego gets involved, you create one painting. If you pull ego back and restrain it, you create another
yeah.
painting.
Oh, yeah.
Neither one is wrong, but they may be both teaching tools for you so that you can see, oh boy, I can see how ego really took over when
How I clutched that.
Right.
Not good.
Exactly. Yes, Jeff.
I think detachment is wonderful, because I think where a lot of us suffer is we place an emotional response to outcomes in which we desire.
Right.
So to have the desire to move forward in life and progression of attaining that which you want, at the same time remaining detached to the outcomes
Yeah.
and being present in the moment, I think is
Right.
one.
That's the
Good key
Buddha
to
tells
happiness.
us. All suffering comes from attachment to outcome. And if you look back in your life, I think you will see. Yes,
Plus,
Mary.
when we attach that as a co-creator, that means our ego's involved because we feel like what we've created or what we can create is so much better than the divine.
Exactly. Exactly. It is true. Yes. And the fact is, as soon as we start interfering, we immediately limit the potential of the divine. Yes.
If we don't attach to outcome and we don't live our humanness and we don't live in our ego and try to overcome it, and if we don't accept the adversity and the lessons we learned, why the heck are we here?
No, but that is the point. You can still come up with outcomes. You can still dream. It's not saying don't dream.
Well, that's why we're here.
That is
We're-
it, exactly.
God's a
But it is
creator,
when
we're made
you
in His
become
image,
totally
created.
fixed
Versed in it.
on a certain way that things should happen. That's when the suffering happens. Yes.
So I think there's two different things. One is experience and the other is knowledge. So the experience.
Oh yeah, good.
Is the, well, I mean, so the experience is the emotional part of us where we
Right.
feel the joy in life or don't feel the joy in life, and we feel
Mhm.
love in different shades, all the way from hate to love, right, to unconditional love. And then there's the knowledge where you have a deep level understanding of your connection to others, and maybe that's what we're trying to build on through our
Mhm.
experiences. And I think once you have both, then you can finally say
Absolutely.
goodbye.
Bonnie.
And as an artist, I noticed that if the piece stays around me, that I can pick out all of what I consider faults or
Imperfections.
imperfections. I wish it was something else. And
Right.
over time, I see them less and less
Exactly.
because I've moved on to something else. That emotional attachment is no longer there. from when I created
There
it
you go.
to when I can admire it later.
That's the thing. And many times, that is where the suffering comes from, is the emotional attachment. Yes, Shelley?
I keep thinking about that. There's the quote that people can be so heavenly bound that they're no earthly good.
Oh, thank you, Shirley's mother. Yes. That was Shirley's mum.
And I think
Shelley
some
was
of
the
these
quote.
philosophical quotes can be that way.
Yes.
That, I mean, they make sense to a certain level, but it's hard to apply them without the tools,
I know.
without, you know,
Yes.
something else to be able to
Right.
gain
But
from that.
I love that quote because it literally sums it up.
Mhm.
Some people are so heavenly, they're no earthly good.
Isn't that in the Bible somewhere? Don't get too drunk on spirit. Where is that somewhere?
That with
Spirits for the next. Yes, I'll look that up.
Study that next week.
I think just even in the school of life it is don't get too drunk on spirits. Oh my goodness me, look at the time. It's just raced by today. It's just been amazing. But anyway, we get to come back next week and do this all over again with the